All of us have heard of one time or another the Ford Motor Company. Simply known as Ford, it's an American multinational automaker company that's been manufacturing and selling cars for almost 117 years. This company was founded by Henry Ford on June 16, 1903. Being responsible for creating the automobile this huge and successful, Henry Ford has been at the center of discussion for more than a millennia. Basically, there are many things that you know, and some things that you may have never heard about him, and that's why in today's video we're going to talk about things about Henry Ford that you never knew. But before we jump into the video, don't forget to leave us a big thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content just like this, and ding that notification bell so you never miss another update from us. The biography of Henry Ford. Born in Spring Wells Township, Wayne County, Michigan on July 30th, 1863, Ford was the eldest of 6 children in a family. Henry Ford had a passion for mechanics from a very young age. He was only 12 when he would spend most of his spare time in a machine shop that he had created himself, and by the time he was 15, he had already constructed his first steam engine. At the age of 32, in 1896, he made the first self-propelled vehicle. He called it a quadricycle because it ran on 4 tires. By that time, the quote-unquote horseless carriage was an innovation, and not many people knew about it. So it's safe to say that this important creation led to the foundation for the future and more practical designs. After a couple of years, on June 16, 1903, Ford founded the Ford Motor Company. This company later turned out to be one of the world's largest and most profitable companies. Nowadays, it is the second largest US-based automaker and the 5th largest in the whole world. Some strange details about Henry Ford. Number 1. Ford had some strange spiritual ideas. Henry Ford is one of the most successful masterminds in the world. It's not surprising that people would want to know how this thoughtful process functioned. The man responsible for introducing the first marketable cars to the public had obviously a very unique mind and a very unique way of thinking, to say the least. He was a genius in the minds of many folks. However, according to many sources, he was very skeptical of his knowledge and uniqueness. I mean, sure, knowledge and education were priorities for the guy. He went on to say, quote, "That man is best educated who knows the greatest number of things that are so, and who can do the greatest number of things to help and heal the world." However, he believed that his unique ideas and thoughts were not really his own. He said that they actually belonged to the so-called mastermind. And in 1928, in an interview with the Detroit Times, Ford had explained this mastermind or great spirit was the one behind those ideas. He explained that this mysterious entity was sending him and other people brainwave messages, and the one with enough knowledge would know how to listen and find a use of these voices. Quote, "I never did anything by my own volition. I was pushed by invisible forces." He believed that his knowledge would one day change the world, and it most certainly did. Quote, "The gifted man bears his gifts onto the world, not for his own benefit, but for the people among whom he is placed. For the gifts are not his, he himself is a gift to the community." Number 2. You may be surprised to find out that Henry Ford actually ran for the US Senate and almost won. It's not surprising that an intelligent man like Ford would establish himself in many things, even in politics. As he really cared about the well-being of the society, politics seemed like a great place for him. Quote, "Politics in the truest of sense has to do with the prosperity, peace, and security of the people." Quote, "If a young man wants to fit himself for the politics of tomorrow, let him fit himself into an essential industry for the purpose of learning how best to conduct it for the whole public good." As World War I was coming to an end, there were a series of changes going on in the United States. These changes did not seem promising to the upcoming decade. At the time, Henry Ford was already well known and respected for his successful invention of the first widely affordable automobile, the Model T. Having a great reputation in public, Henry Ford seemed like a great fit to become a senator. He took his chance in 1918, ran for the Senate on the Democratic ticket, and actually almost won. Honestly, he was only 4,500 votes away from winning, and ultimately lost to Republican candidate Truman Newberry. Number 3. Henry Ford bought a newspaper and used it to disseminate hate speech against Jews. Most of you might find it shocking that Henry Ford actually had some anti-Semitic views and was quite loud about them. He even bought a whole newspaper to make his opinions heard. In 1918, the same year that he ran for Senate, he fought the Dearborn Independent and was in control of the content that it was published with. This way, Ford could end up having a wide influence on the community. And in 1920, this newspaper published the headline, "The International Jew, the World's Problem," which contained the articles basically stating that the Jewish people were the main reason for World War I starting and other various issues that were directed against the society. Hagia Dinner, the Paul and Sylvia Steinberg Professor of American Jewish History and Professor professor of Hebrew and Judaic Studies of the New York University, said this about the matter. Quote, "What Henry Ford says, people stop and listen. There are people who talked about him as a potential presidential candidate in the 20s. Some local tavern keeper makes an anti-Semitic remark over the bar. Well, nobody cares. Somebody may listen and maybe repeat it, but it has a very limited span. But Henry Ford's ability to gain a national audience with his own words made him a very dangerous person. By that time, this newspaper was very popular. As Hosea states, quote, "There's a lot of small-town newspapers that would publish scrupulous anti-Semitic material, so it wasn't unusual in that way. But what is notable about the Dearborn Independent was that it was also widespread throughout the Ford Motor dealerships. And so there'd be stacks of them in a dealership in California, a couple in Massachusetts, a few in Iowa, and even in some places, the dealership would actually put copies of the newspaper in the car. So that way, whenever you drove off with your new Model T, there you would have on the seat next to you a copy of the Dearborn Independent." Despite the fact that Henry Ford apologized and shut down the paper in 1927, his content was never lost and would gain increasing fame in the Nazi world with the headline, "The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem." It's also noteworthy that Ford and his opinions about Jewish people were actually praised by Adolf Hitler. Quote, "Hitler was very aware of Henry Ford's writings, and praised them. He turned to the same documents. There's a common thread. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a cherished text for both, and there were certainly business connections between Ford Motors and the Nazi regime," said Hosea Denner. Number 4. Henry Ford basically spied on his employees. It is of no doubt that Henry Ford ruled a gigantic company. He was always in control and was praised for his reforms. What many people don't know, though, is that Henry Ford was actually very strict with his workers and wouldn't hesitate to invade their private lives. Ford had his strict standards and rules. He wanted to make sure that every employee he would hire followed by his rules. He even gathered a team of so-called investigators that would basically spy on the workers, even to the extent where they would investigate their homes and even their families. Anybody who disobeyed these strict rules would get a pay cut or even be terminated in some cases. Number 6. Henry Ford was actually a good friend of Thomas Edison. Some of you might find it surprising that American inventor and businessman Thomas Alva Edison, who was considered to be America's greatest inventor, was lifelong friends with Henry Ford. The two had met in 1896 when Ford attended the convention of the Association of Edison Illumination Companies in New York. Ford had looked up to Thomas since his boyhood. He was Henry's role model. When they had an encounter, Edison gave Ford some words of encouragement, told him that electric cars were the path to the future, and really liked the model of the quadricycle. Quote, "Your car is self-contained, carries its own power plant, no fire, no boiler, no smoke, and no steam. You have the thing. Keep at it." This interaction led to a very strong impression of Henry Ford. Years later, he had even sent Thomas a letter of invitation to his company. Edison ignored the letter at first, and he was a very private person, plus he didn't really like making new friends. What's more, Thomas was afraid that people would only befriend him to take advantage of his reputation and power. However, a year later, when Ford had introduced his Model T Ford, Thomas felt safe to let his guard down, and ever since then, the two were inseparable, having similar thoughts and ideas. This was a great friendship. And in fact, later Ford was the one to fund many of Edison's projects. The writer Asad Baruddin mentions in the article, quote, "They grew so close that their families started vacationing together, going to Fort Myers and elsewhere around the country." Again, Edison was not comfortable doing this with other people, but in Ford, he found an intellectual equal, a business success, and someone who had always been weirdly pulled into the world of fame just like Edison. On that note, we come to the conclusion of this video. Those were just some weird details about Henry Ford's life that you may have never heard before. There's way more, and we would like to know your opinion about the video. Which details on our list did you find the most interesting or surprising? Don't hesitate to leave a comment down below, and press that like button if you enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.